From the evening of August 28, 1997, two University of Kentucky students Holly K. Dunn and her boyfriend, Christopher Maier, had left a party early to take a walk and have a moment alone. The darkness of the night enveloped them. Without realizing that someone was watching them, they began to walk near some train tracks. Suddenly, a man in the darkness appeared behind an electrical box, gave them a threatening look, began to run towards them armed, and it was at that moment that a real nightmare was unleashed. Maturino Resendiz, known as the Railroad Killer, was a man who hid by traveling the country by train, becoming the most wanted criminal in the United States at that time. He confessed to murdering 9 people, although later DNA tests linked him to many more deaths, extending his trail of victims from California to Florida and estimated at more than 20 murders. Maturino Resendiz forced Maier to his knees, searched his backpack, and then tied his hands with the straps. He took a baby-sized rock and dropped it on her head. Holly had the opportunity to escape and run away at that point, but states, "I wasn't going to leave Chris." When Resendiz finished his attack on Maier, he turned his attention to her. "He came at me," Holly recounts. "He took off my belt and tied my hands behind my back." She had to endure much more than being knocked unconscious and brutally beaten. However, the extent of her suffering would only be revealed years later during the trial against her attacker. She doesn't know how much time passed since she was knocked unconscious, but when she awoke, her boyfriend was no longer responsive. Holly, left with no other choice, had to leave him there and go out to get help on her own. Finally, Holly arrives at a college student's house around 2:45 a.m. She is in the middle of the night. Luckily for her, Chad Gutz, the young man who lived there, was awake studying and responded to her call quickly. Opening the door, he found Holly bloodied and badly injured, with a broken jaw and a puncture wound to her neck. Despite barely being able to speak, Holly gathers enough strength to alert him that her boyfriend was still lying on the train tracks. Chad didn't hesitate to quickly call the police to report what had happened and provide help. When the paramedics arrived on the scene, Holly tried to elaborate on what had happened and pleaded for them to go get Chris first. One of the paramedics agreed to go along with the police to assist him. However, upon returning, he confirmed that they had found a body near the railroad tracks, fatally struck in the head with a rock, and unfortunately it was no longer possible to transport him to the hospital. Chris had passed away. They tried to handle the situation as best they could without Holly finding out, not wanting to scare her even more and make her situation worse than it was. At the hospital, Holly kept asking her family about Chris. Finally, her father answers the question they were all trying to avoid. "Chris is dead, isn't he?" And he said, "Yes, he died." At that moment, Holly broke down, overwhelmed by a deep sense of survivor's guilt. She remembered Chris as a lovely, kind, and caring guy. A great guy in every way. She couldn't understand why she was still alive while he hadn't survived. And that night, her shock didn't end there. The police soon connected her case to other murders, revealing to her that Chris was not the only victim. 4 people had been killed, and Holly was the only survivor. Realizing the magnitude of the tragedy, the weight of the situation overwhelmed her. As time passed, investigators began to lose hope. They knew the killer would not stop, and his choice to use railroads as a means of transportation proved to be a shrewd move. The trains were virtually impossible to track because they could not be monitored, with thousands of them traveling millions of miles of track across the United States. It was nearly impossible to keep track of him. Devin Anderson, the state's attorney, discovered that this man was hiding under multiple aliases, which further complicated his capture. If someone was willing to sleep on a train or in a field or wherever, he could stay hidden for a long time. After 3 long years and 9 more victims, the FBI finally managed to identify the man, Angel Maturino Resendiz, a criminal originally from Puebla, Mexico. He was captured while attempting to cross the U.S. border. Holly's help proved crucial to investigators. Even on the verge of death in the hospital, she was determined to assist in his capture. Holly retained every possible detail about her attacker, from the shape of his face to every tattoo and scar that could identify him. She recorded everything in her memory as she was attacked because she told herself, "If I survive this, I'm going to get you." Investigators confirmed that they were able to capture him because of descriptions of the tattoos and scars provided by Holly years earlier. Up to that point, Sketches and general descriptions had been useless, as he always changed his appearance after committing a murder. At that moment, Holly experienced great relief, but she was aware that she would have to face him at the trial. Reliving the tragic night of the attack when she lost her boyfriend and had been savagely attacked, the day of the trial arrived and Holly traveled the night before with her family to Houston. Although emotionally devastated, she felt strong enough to testify. What worried her most was that her assailant's defense planned to argue an insanity plea. If they could convince the jury, Resendez could be sent to an institution and eventually released. However, the prosecutor still had an ace up his sleeve that could change the course of the trial. As the sole survivor, Holly was the last hope to convince the jury. The prosecutor wanted her to be the last to testify, so by the time she took the stand, the jury had already heard the harrowing details of all the other murders. Entering the courtroom, Holly took her seat to testify without looking at her assailant. She decided to ignore him, stand her ground, and focus on finishing her statement without breaking down. As an opening, Prosecutor Anderson asked her an unexpected question. "What did you do last weekend?" This question, beyond simple, was meant to empower her and show Resendez that Holly was stronger than he was. In a firm voice, Holly replied, "I graduated from college." Then, with courage, she began to recount the details of that night. Her account was devastating. Holly described every detail of her attacker as if it had happened the night before. The courtroom was filled with a mixture of disbelief, sadness, and revulsion. The jurors wept as well. Anderson could not hold back his tears as he felt proud of Holly. She had done it. She had done it. This was the moment the prosecutor had been waiting for throughout the trial, to have one of Resendez's victims confront him face to face. Something no one else had ever accomplished. Holly, the sole survivor, represented the voice of all the victims who did not get justice. The question that would end the railroad killer case finally came. Anderson asked, "Can you identify the defendant? What is he wearing?" Holly knew she would have to look at him, so she turned to him, pointed firmly at him, and answered, "He's wearing a white button-down shirt," and at that moment, Holly felt like she was on the verge of fainting. Although testifying was a cathartic act, she reached her limit when she finally turned her gaze to him, finding a blank expression on his face. It was then that she collapsed and had to be carried out of the courtroom, completely emotionally devastated. The jury determined that the defendant posed an imminent danger to society, and the judge sentenced him to death. Holly, despite the pain of all those years, stood tall. Even before the trial, she had already begun to help other victims, giving talks and motivating women to face their own recovery processes, sharing what she had learned along the way. Working through her emotions and offering support to others helps her move forward in her healing. Being a survivor is one thing, but helping others and doing it in a professional way was something else. That's why she decided to start her own advocacy center for victims of violent crime. Since opening in 2008, they have achieved justice for more than 300 survivors. Holly has become a hero. She didn't let what happened to her destroy her. Instead, she turned that experience into her life's purpose to help others. While her work is admirable, her inner journey is even more profound. She managed to define herself as a survivor, not a victim. If you think justice has been done, don't forget to like us and turn on the little bell so you don't miss any other case. See you next time.